Hello, 3 people that are here. 4 people. Okay. 2. I'm pausing the recording, right? So, again, let's just get started. I'll start a little slow maybe, and hopefully, the rest of the class will get in quick enough so that when we actually get to the material, till we get to talking about the reading and stuff, that most of the students will be here by then. But I was just gonna, like last class, unfortunately we missed a whole day because of the whole scare, the whole Hurricane Laura scare. And so we missed it. We got a lot of stuff to catch up on. We're a little bit behind already, beginning of semester. But I'll try to walk through some of this stuff so we can get through a big chunk of material today. But last class we got a little bit further than my 1120 class. We talked a bit about the allegory of the cave, and I'm going to do a screen share here. Just give me a second, so we can look. I found a different illustration, which I prefer. I think it's a better one, although it has its own problems with the story. But we already covered this. I want to go over it one more time, a little bit, quickly. We won't spend as much time on it, and kind of pick up where we left off. All right. I think I left the class with a question at the end of the class last time, and I want to begin the class by discussing the question. But some people might not have been here. They might not have had a chance to check the video out. So let me briefly go over this illustration again. It's a picture that's supposed to be, representative of Plato's Allegory of the cave, which we covered last time. This is remember, an allegory is it's a story. It's a narrative that is supposed to be representative or metaphorical. So it's symbolic of something else. So in this story, right, this sort of symbolic myth, this allegory, we have the situation where you've got all these prisoners who are tied up in a cave. They've got their backs against this wall, right? And their whole life, that's all they have. This is all they know, right? They're looking at these shadows that are projected on the wall, and behind them, there's this platform right here. In this illustration, it's just a brick wall, and you've got these, these women in togas, walking across with their little puppets. And the puppets, because there's a big bonfire behind them, the puppets are projecting shadows on the wall. Well, one of the points we made, or we talked about last class is, if we're one of these prisoners in Plato's cave, like looking at these shadows our whole life, and this is all we know, right? We're not allowed to turn around. We can't move. We're stuck there. For all we know, that these shadows aren't really shadows, right? These are real. This is reality, right? This is the world as far as we know it. But remember, in the story, one of these prisoners is able to break free, right? They escape. They're able to see the wall behind them. They're able to see the flame. And they're finally able to realize that what they've been looking at is not an actual the thing itself, but the shadow of the thing, right? And in fact, it's a shadow of a puppet, right? There's even, further up, to the right here, as he gets closer to the edge of the cave and to escape the outer world, he starts to realize that these shadows are even further and further removed from a fuller picture of, what's going on, right? That these puppets aren't even real, right? That's a puppet of a man and a puppet of a horse. I guess that's supposed to be like a wolf or a dog or something at the end, right? Just a puppet. But outside on the surface, right, there's an actual man, there's an actual horse, there's actual dogs, wolves, all this stuff, right? And remember, like, also one part of the story is when the guy gets out of the cave. What's that? Did you have something to say? Question? I'm sorry. I'll go on. So the guy escapes the cave. He's overwhelmed by the light of the sun, right? This guy is used to being in this dank, dark cave. He struggles to get to the surface, and finally he makes it. But again, it's confusing, right? The sunlight is blinding. It's overwhelming, but eventually he's able to see everything. He's able to see the water and the trees and the clouds and the sky and all that good stuff. So at this point in the story, Plato says that, or Socrates is the one who's doing all the talking, right? But Socrates says the guy goes back down to the cave. And there's a couple ways you can interpret it, but one way is to say that, he's got this sort of ethical imperative, right? Once the guy realizes the truth and he realizes that his whole life has just been shadows and all that he took to be real was just images, but not actual, you know, things, but images of things. And once he has full knowledge of the world, particularly knowledge of what's good and what's right, that he must go back down to the cave to try to save his friends, right? To try to enlighten them, to try to get them to take the journey themselves, right? But what's going to happen, right? I think we already covered this last time, but somebody remind me, right? What what do you think is going to happen when this guy goes back down to the cave? First off, remember he's like, used to the surface now. It's not so bright. He's used to the sun, and now he's got to go back down to the cave, right? Where there's hardly any light at all, so he can't see very well. He's probably tripping all over stuff, bumping into walls. And then he goes and he sees his old friends, and he wants to get them to take the journey as well. And he starts talking about the sun, and he talks about the clouds, and there's a world outside, and these are just shadows. And how are these prisoners that are still down there? How are they going to react?
Personally, I think because they've been down there for so long, I feel like they would think he's not making any sense. None of it will make sense to them. They would think, something has happened. They won't believe him, basically. There might be some believers among them, but they will just think he's crazy or something has happened.
Right. That's exactly what he thinks in the story. He's like, yeah, they're going to think that this guy is nuts, that, he's crazy, all that stuff, right? Like, what is he talking about? Jonathan, did you want to add something to that, or?
I would say like some of them will what she said, like they probably will consider him crazy, or they'll probably will think this is somewhat revolutionary.
Right, and because also you gotta think about it too. He's probably like he's talking about stuff they've never seen, right? Like, what's a tree? What are clouds? What's the sky? What the heck are you talking about, right? You're nuts, right? In my last class, one of my students was saying that maybe there might be a few of them that were kind of curious, that might want to hear more about it, but kind of agree. Like most of them would be like, this guy's nuts. He's sort of crazy. And there's a couple ways I guess you could interpret this. One way that I think is, and maybe they're all, it's not like there's only one right way to think of it. But one of the problems is maybe, and I think this is definitely one thing Plato wants us to believe. You can't really go down there and just sort of tell them this is the truth, right? Here's X, Y, and Z are true, and this is false, and you just need to follow me around and all this stuff. People are gonna react to that. Like, what are you talking about? You're nuts, right? They're gonna they're initially gonna be knee-jerk reaction, antagonistic, right? So for Plato, all you can really do, according the way Socrates puts it, you can point their soul in the right direction, right? They really have to take that journey themselves, right? And so what does he mean by that? Like, how do you point someone's soul in the right direction? That's pretty vague, right? But what he means, I guess for the simple version, it seems like you ask them questions, right? You go like Socrates did. You go around doing philosophy and interrogating people and trying to come up with answers. And when you hear someone's beliefs, you try to ask them, well, why do you believe that, right? So again, there's a whole metaphor for that. What's that?
Like epistemology?
Did you say epistemology?
Yeah, epistemology.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah, I guess like a little bit of epistemology, and sort of you get them to question their own beliefs instead of just telling them the truth. You get them to reflect on it themselves, right? And that way, it's difficult. They have to separate themselves from their ego and their attachments and all that sort of thing. But maybe some people won't be able to do this, right? Plato seemed kind of like, hey, not everybody's going to be able to get out of the cave. They're not going to be able to accept this. They're not going to be able to think critically, right? But you have to be the person that makes the journey out. If they're going to do it, they're going to have to make the journey themselves, right? And there's a saying that it's attributed to the Buddha, that when a student is ready, the teacher appears. And, you know, what that's usually interpreted to mean is that, you know, if you've got, you know, this student that's not ready to learn, right? If they're stubborn and they come to class and they got their arms crossed, like, this is stupid. Why do I need to learn philosophy? This is dumb. I'll be an engineer. I'm never going to use that. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter, like, how awesome a professor I am, because obviously I'm awesome, right? Doesn't matter, right? Like, if you're not ready, then you're not going to learn. If you have that attitude like this, you know, I'm not going to be open to truth, then you're not going to learn it. So all that Plato, I guess, trying to say is, you know, the person themselves has to make the journey, and it involves this sort of openness to exploration, right? So let's see, Samantha, did you have something you wanted to add, Samantha? I saw you had your hand raised there. So.
I did. My question is, because I 100% get what you're saying and understand it, how is someone going to, the question is, how is somebody going to imagine or ask questions about something they don't have the definition of? So like you said, if they go and he comes back and, if he comes back and he talks about the sun, the stars, and whatever wind is blowing and stuff like that, it's not that it's impossible for the people that are down there to learn. It's just that how are they going to summon the teacher per se, or ask questions if they don't know what they're asking?
That's definitely I like that. I like that point. And I think honestly that's another aspect. I think another point. I do think he's also addressing that. I use this analogy sometimes, like, you know, if let's say your major is mathematics. Let's just say you're really into mathematics, right? And so you go to grad school to study mathematics. You want to get a PhD in math, right? So you take all these super hard classes and like differential equations and like you know, real high order, like abstract, pure mathematics, right? You know, that's almost like the guy that just got out of the cave, right? I remember when I was in grad school, like I went from being, you know, like one of the smartest kids in class, you know, like the top 2, 3, or 4 or 5, you know, sometimes, you know, I was usually pretty, you know, and then I go to grad school and it's like, there's like all these people asking these really deep, and I was overwhelming. It was like that bright light, like it doesn't make any sense, too much, like, whoa, but then you get used to it, right? So back to the mathematics person, right? You know, let's say, you know, you go to grad school and you're like, wow, this is like even harder than undergraduate. Like we're dealing with like really difficult problems in mathematics, like stuff that like the most smart mathematicians, even they can't solve it. And it's really hard stuff, right? So you go to grad school, that's outside of the cave, that's on the surface, that's the full picture of everything to do with mathematics, right? Now you got to go back down to the cave. You just got your PhD. It's your first year of teaching. You want to be a teacher, let's say, in college, and you have to tutor people at the library who are taking remedial math, and they're taking college algebra. So it's like you were saying, when a guy goes down to the cave and he's talking about the wind and the clouds, like he's using words and talking about like ideas that these people down there have no inkling, they have no idea what he's talking about, right? So it's almost like, maybe you've had this experience, I know I have. You go to look for help from somebody like a TA, a student teacher or whatever, a tutor, and you have these problems in your math class, and you go to the tutor and you leave the tutor even more confused than when you got there, right? Because like, and maybe it's because, like you're saying, maybe they're talking at a level that to them is clear, and they forgot how it was when they first got to grad school, or when they first got out of the cave, or when they first, you know, all that good stuff, how hard it was for them. And it took their mind had to adjust to all these deep, you know, and now it's become second nature and they just understand it. So I think you're right. I think that is an aspect of it. It's not just that the people in the cave are stubborn and lazy and don't want to learn, but the person that goes down there and guides them and puts their soul in the right direction, the way he guides them and points their soul in the right direction has to take into account, right? So any good teacher, I guess, has to be able to try to bring that deeper level of understanding. I mean, that sounds kind of condescending, I guess it kind of is condescending, right? You have to sort of like, I don't want to say dumb it down, but you have to sort of speak to it on a level that you're going to understand, right? But I think that even with that understanding, you're still going to have issues. Like, even if, let's say, you're one of these people who's curious already, and maybe you're like, hey, I don't understand what he's talking about, but it sounds interesting. Like, I'll go check this out with him. Like, what's it going to hurt? Like, he's going to, like, open my chains and let me just explore? Okay, why not? He got back. He's been gone for a while. He came back. Like, let's just check it out. Even if you have that mentality and you're naturally curious, you got to understand that at each level, it's probably pretty unsettling, right? Like, if your whole life you've been in this cave and have just taken it for granted that those shadows are real, that's a shadow of a man, a shadow of a whatever. The very first time you're able to get behind that wall and see the fire and see the puppets, you know, even if you're honest with yourself, you're like, yeah, this is true. It's probably gonna be like, holy crap, like, I was a fool, I was wrong. Like, this is like, it might be unsettling, right? It might be uncomfortable, right? And so I think that's another part of the story, right? It's not supposed to be easy, right? But I love all these comments, but it's really making me go to all these different, like, side digressions that I actually didn't intend to do. I was just kind of setting things up. Does somebody have one more thing to say? I was setting things up because I wanted to talk
I
about
want to say something.
puppet masters, but yeah. Go ahead.
So like,
Yeah.
so I used to be a tutor before, a math tutor. So like, whenever I tutor some people who are from remedial classes, like, it's hard to meet halfway. At first, you're like, well, I forgot about that, but let me get back to you. And then once you bridge the gap and you earn their trust, and then you'll be able to connect with them, then they'll trust you that okay, maybe I'll learn something from this girl, or
Right.
like, that's how I do it before. So it's kind of hard at first, like, I have to talk to them first, like, earn their trust and everything, and then like, then they're not gonna think I'm crazy. So now we're on the same path. Okay, I understand what you're doing. Like, it's basically like that when I used to be a tutor.
Good. Yeah, exactly. So now, I think like the way you're talking about it, you know, like you said, you used the term bridge the gap. I think that's maybe a good way to think about the way Socrates, or at least the way that we get, I mean, we don't really know who Socrates was. We just kind of get the versions that Plato gives us or whatever. But the way he's presented is kind of like sometimes he's not so good at this, but he's trying to, instead of just like preaching or saying, hey, this is truth, this is like the thing, he tries to find like common ground, at least on the face of it. Some people think he's not sincere. A lot of people read him as being ironic and a smart ass, and he's really pestering the people he talks to. But I think Plato's trying to portray him as the kind of guy who's like, I'm just making you question things, and I want you to think about it in a way that you sort of like, you get it. I don't want to like talk down to you. I want to like, at least we have to like come to like some base level of agreement that we can build off of, right? And we'll talk a bit later in the semester about dialectic. Don't worry right now about that term, but just sort of real quick, dialectic, you know, it's not debate. Dialectic is sort of what Plato advocates, and it's a sort of like a back and forth, right? It's sort of like a discussion, and we both discuss and we investigate together, and we both are honest with each other about our beliefs and about what we want to, you know, what we want to know, and we try to arrive at truth together, right? Through you know, maybe different perspectives, right? And opposing views that might clash, but we try to reconcile those and like you said, bridge the gap, right? So that, you know, it's not just when it comes to like tutoring, you know, for him it can apply to all aspects of life, and interacting with people and trying to be a better person, and et cetera, right? So anyway, but to bring it back to sort of the focus that I wanted to well, I think this is what we ended on last time, but the focus I was setting everything up for. Let me share the screen one more time. I want to show you that picture of the allegory of the cave. But, you know, notice, and in this picture, I don't know, I don't like it, even though I do like the pretty ladies and all that. Usually this is I like this illustration. One thing I don't like about it is normally the people who are holding up these puppets are very mysterious looking. Like they're these little druid looking, you know, they're wearing their hoods and they're all like mysterious and kind of like almost sinister looking. And I honestly think that that's more like what Plato intended. In that illustration, they almost look like servants that are just like, told to go stand over there. But what do you think he's got going on here, right? The idea is that you've got people who are at the bottom of the cave, and he thinks all of us are kind of in this situation, most of our lives, that we just sort of passively accept what we're told. But who's the people? Who are the puppet masters? I think that's sort of where we ended class last time. And I don't really remember how far we got. So maybe y'all can help me with this. You know, what do you think he thinks the puppet masters are, or what is his intention? You think in this metaphor? Any ideas? Someone said the government in the chat box, and yeah, I think that's what he are politicians, right? The people who control the city, who are in power, and all that stuff, right? So yeah, politicians for sure. He was pretty, I think, critical of the politicians of his day and age.
Could be religious beliefs.
I think you cut off at the beginning. Did you say religious beliefs or?
Yeah, I was talking about, like the deities or whoever they're worshiping at the time, controlling their thoughts, their morals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an example that would work, right? I think that would be a good example of like just organized religion in general, right? Whether we're talking about back then or even today, people that are, seen as religious authorities can often use that power, or that authority or that respect in ways that might not be so great. Sometimes they do it in ways that are good. They might, tell people things and make them behave in really good ways, right? They also might make it, use it to control people, right? So certainly I think so. Someone said the government, someone said religion.
Culture.
What else?
Culture.
So what else?
Culture. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, I think so.
Like,
yeah.
So basically, like in the Philippines, let's say, I grew up in a family where there's no boyfriends like for like when you're in college until like I don't know, from birth to college until you graduate, you can have a boyfriend kind of thing. Like, so basically, it's in their family. I mean, I'm just
you gotta
stating an example,
pure.
or like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm just stating something like that. Like,
Right.
it's
No,
what
I
you grew up
remember-
in.
No, I was dating a woman she was from one of the Caribbean islands, and her family, right? The fact that she was dating all these men in America, they were like, no one's going to want to marry you. Now that they know that she's like, no, in America is different, like it's not, there's not this shame, right? So you had, like you said, it's like cultural, right? Someone said family. I guess that kind of ties into some of the things you just said though too, because I think sometimes, you got cultural norms, but then you also got, and I think in a certain sense, your parents, whoever your guardian, whoever, whoever raised you, in a sense that, like, I guess you could say they are like, they kind of like, they present the world in a certain way, right? Which is kind of like not absolutely true. Let me share that slide again, right? Like, I mean, in a certain sense, when you're a little kid, you're kind of like these guys down here at the bottom of the cave, right? You're like, you don't know anything about anything, and everything you learn from the adults in your life usually, right? And they don't always tell you the full story, right? But I think sometimes, and I think Plato would say that that's necessary, right? That when you're a child, you're not fully developed and you're not mature enough, and so your parents, maybe they can't tell you the full truth, right? They have to sort of maybe sugarcoat some things, right? You gotta you can't just tell them about murder and death and destruction when they're like little babies. Let them be kids for a while or whatever, right? You can't tell them certain stories, he would say, because they'll misunderstand them or misinterpret them or mislead them, right? So good. So we mentioned what? Let me recap. The government or politicians. I think that's really what Plato has in mind more than anything else. We mentioned religion. We mentioned, someone said culture. there's an aspect of culture that I'd like to zero in on, and then family. But what to me, I think, like in this day and age, what has a big influence? There's one thing I think. Someone said society. I think that's kind of like culture, same thing. What's a part of, where does our culture come from today now? A lot of times, someone said social norms. Yeah, but even those, where do those come from a lot? Social media. Yeah, I would say media in general, right? Social media
Everything.
seems to be very dominant. But yeah, like you said, all kinds of media, news media, social media, movies, TV. I think that those sort of, I think it's two-way, right? Like, culture influences media, and media influences culture, and it's sort of this cycle or back and forth. But I think a lot of us, we just sort of passively, we look at our Facebook feed and just accept. And I know I used to be, I tell my students this a lot. I used to be a news junkie, right? I used to watch the news, especially when I was in grad school. If I wasn't in class or studying, I'd be watching the news all day, and I'd watch everything. I'd watch the foreign. I'd go to, BBC and Al Jazeera, and all the American stations, and left, right, in the middle. And I don't recommend that, right? It's not good for your mental health. It's good to be informed, but don't overdo it, I think. But it's very confusing, because you get all these stories, the same story, the same report, but they're all reporting it from all these different angles, right? And presenting it in different ways, right? So, for instance, you watch a story on CNN or on MSNBC, and it's always going to be, very left-wing. It's not that they lie. I don't think, some of them, they don't report everything, I think is really more an accurate way to put it. They'll leave out the details that makes their side of the story or their political view look bad, right? And if you go to Fox News, same thing, right? They all think they're objective, though. You notice that? They all think that, oh no, they don't understand. Everyone thinks that they've got the right view, but it's confusing, right? As a watcher, as a viewer, if you're trying to get at the truth of things, if you're trying to get out of the cave, which I hope is what we're trying to do in this class, is at least try to get out of the darn cave, right? We have to get up behind that fire, right? I guess, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that, don't watch the news, but when you watch the news, I think you have to realize, who's the sponsor, right? Who's paying for this news channel? Who's advertising with these people, right?
Not everything they say is right. Like,
right.
You have to have your own set of beliefs as well. That
exactly. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like the best thing you can do is really, like, maybe get a few sources and try, like you said, work it out on your own and try to figure it out. Like, what sounds the best for you? Watch as many get as many perspectives as you can, and try to, put them together. And, I got the picture here because it's, just to make a point, it's not that these shadows, the shadows that these prisoners are looking at, they resemble the truth, like they resemble the real thing, but they're a distorted version of it, right? So it's kind of like, when you're watching Fox or you're watching CNN, it's not that they lie, but it's almost like they don't give you the whole thing. They give you this sort of filtered, partial, not complete picture of what's going on. So I think somebody actually said that in the comments. You got to watch all the news and get all the perspectives. Yeah, I think you're right, Michael, is totally, and even then, you're still kind of like, I think today it's great that we have access to all these different sources, but at the same time, it presents a big problem, how to sort it all out, right, and get to the truth, right? So that's kind of going to be one of the main objectives in this course, is figuring out how to do that. How do we, I think one thing for sure, though, is to kind of understand the source, who's saying it, why are they saying it, do they have biases, and maybe also be aware of your own bias. Like somebody was saying earlier, I forget who, but I think it was Allison, or maybe it was Samantha, was talking about culture and how our culture shapes our view and stuff like that. So maybe we have to be aware of that. Maybe my own view, my own culture shapes the way I see things. And so when I react a certain way to a certain viewpoint, I have to, keep that in mind. Maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm seeing it that way and I shouldn't, or maybe I should, but, they see it that way because they can't help but see it that way because of where they're from, So I think that's one way we bridge the gap, to use that expression again. Right? So, all right, I think we've said enough about the allegory of the cave. We'll actually come back to it. We're going to come back to it when we finish Plato. We're going to come back to it, and we're going to delve deep into it and get even more out of it, because I think there's even more layers to the metaphor than we were able to discuss. But I'd like to try to get to this first reading at least a little bit today. The Apology, right? This is the one that's available online. So you still need to get this, the Symposium textbook. I think if I hold it at an angle, it's a little bit easier to see. Yeah, so you need to get that by probably end of the week, next week, since we're a little bit behind. That buys a little bit more time. But let me say a few things first to set up this reading. Not much left. Just real quick, a couple things I want to say, kind of some historical context, and then we'll dive right in. But let me share my screen here again. I've got a slide here. There's a group of, before we get to talking about Socrates and Plato, let's talk. There's a group of men who were contemporaneous with Socrates, and they were known as the Sophists. And Plato portrays them as kind of his rivals, right? So they're not the good guys. They're the bad guys here, okay? And it's not that he didn't respect them, right? He usually treats them as if they're pretty smart and pretty clever, and they're kind of formidable opponents. But they are opponents nonetheless. And you got to keep in mind, just like Socrates, we don't know a lot about these guys. Most of what we know about these guys, we know through Plato. And Plato liked Socrates and didn't seem to agree with the Sophists, so maybe he's got a little bit of bias there too. So you got to keep that in mind, given what we were just saying earlier. But who were these guys? What were they known for, right? In general, they were known for, they advertised this. They told people, and people would pay a lot of money for this. They were kind of teachers, or known to be teachers, but what would they teach? They would teach you how to achieve arete. What the heck is arete? Well, let me type that word in the sidebar here so you guys could write it. It's A-E-R-T-E. That's a Greek word, arete, which it's often translated as virtue, but it can also be translated just as well as excellence. So they're like, look, come to us, the Sophists, and we're going to make you excellent, right? We're going to help you achieve arete, right? Again, that's these guys, the Sophists. How do they do this? And first off, what did they understand by that word, right? To the Greek, that word arete, it had a very kind of basic general meaning. You could apply it to just about anything, not just people. You could say that this, I don't know, I'm trying to, pick up a useful object, right? Like that this pen has arete, right? Because it's well designed, it's easy to hold, and it does its job, right? So it's well designed, and it suits its purpose. It's able to fulfill its function well, right? So that's kind of the general meaning of the word arete. But what did they understand by it? What was human? Like, if you were a person, what did the Sophists do to make you good at being a person? What did that entail? Well, the way they explained it was, we're going to teach you how to be excellent. What that means is you're going to be able to benefit yourself and benefit your friends, harm your enemies, make sure that no harm ever comes to yourself or your friends, and to make sure that all your affairs, your public, your private affairs, are well taken care of, that you got good money and all that stuff is well managed, right? So that's what they meant by excellence, right? That's what they were going to help you achieve, right? And how did they do it? Well, there were a lot of methods, but the most famous thing that they were, the thing they were most famous for was teaching rhetoric. Okay, they would teach rhetoric. First off, what is that? Anybody know what rhetoric means? What is rhetoric? And two, why would you want to learn it and spend all this money? And why would that be helpful to achieve all those things I just mentioned? So what is
Rhetoric.
Yeah, go ahead.
Rhetoric is persuasion and persuasive talk, and it can be used to persuade in the forms of government, in forms of business, in forms of teaching, all things that give you power over people.
Cool. Cool. Two birds with one stone. Yeah, so she answered both questions, right? Yeah, it's you got it pretty much. I mean, I might have said it a little differently, but yeah, it's the art of persuasion, the using language to get a certain response, you know, using style and organizing language in a certain way. And as you said, the benefit, you know, you might be able to get a position in government, you know, become a politician if you could speak well, if you could speak persuasively, right? So they thought that, hey, you had rhetoric and you could speak fancy and persuasively, you could do all those things. You could benefit yourself, benefit your friends, harm your enemies, make sure no harm came to yourself, and make sure that all your public and private affairs were well attended to and you had plenty of money and all that good stuff, all right? Now, if that's all you're caring about, all you care about is benefiting yourself and harming your enemies and all that, etc., how important, you know, and also too, remember, you're using rhetoric, you're using just language to convince people to believe stuff. How important, how essential is it in that process to be honest and truthful and always be telling the truth? Is that gonna be something that you need to do all the time?
You don't have to be honest for that. Like, you can just have to smooth talk everything, you know, to gain your how do you say, um gain your upper hand kind of thing. Like,
Right.
yeah, like,
So, yeah, so being honest is definitely not necessary. It maybe in some cases it might help you, but maybe not in others. It's just like you said, whatever it takes to get a leg up. And so for the sophist, and again, maybe Plato is making them a little bit more sinister than they are, but the way they're portrayed is that, look, they're sort of teaching you, hey, when it comes to truth, forget about it, right? We don't know what that is, right? All we have are our beliefs. All we have are our opinions, okay? So being truthful, being honest, that's really not the essential thing. Getting what you need and getting what you want, that's the essential thing. And how do you do it? You do it by manipulating people with words, with rhetoric, with language, right? Through political power, right? That's how you do it. And so Plato, Socrates, they see themselves as completely antithetical to that, right? That approach, you know, they weren't using this word. This is a new word. It's like a 20th, 19th century word. But the sophists are being portrayed here as relativists, right? This is relativism. Let me put the slide back on the screen, right? So relativism, in a general sense, the word means that, look, there's no way to know anything. All truth and all beliefs are relative, right? They're based on your own personal bias. There's no way you're going to get to any absolute truth. There's no way we can know that. Protagoras is one of the most famous of the sophists. And Plato claims, you know, we have fragments that survive, so it's likely he said something like this. But Protagoras once said that man is the measure of all things. And what he meant by that, we think, is that, look, human beings, man, women, whatever, we decide, we're the measure of everything. We decide what's good, what's bad, and it's all just a matter of our own convention, our own opinion. If you want to get at what's the true or the right answer, you're never going to get to that. We don't have access to that, even if there is such a thing, right? So he's really, you know, seems like he's really skeptical about this. And, you know, it's sort of like if you got a couple people standing outside, you know, a couple of guys are out there and a gust of wind comes by, and one of the guys starts shivering and says it's cold, and the other guy says, nah, it's steamy. Protagoras would say, no, it's neither. It's cold to him and steamy to him. There is no what it is itself, right? But Plato and Socrates want to fight that, and they think that these guys are actually bad for society. That if relativism is right, well, no, it isn't right. But if people believe it's right, everything's gonna fall apart, and that there are right answers to things, right? It's not just a matter of opinion, right? And we're not just talking about things like mathematics. It's not just 2 + 2 = 4, right? You know, it's not. Of course, that's true. That doesn't matter your culture, your opinion. It's just 2 + 2 = 4. But this also applies, Socrates seems to think, to ethics, right? To morals, that there are right answers, correct answers about what's right, what's wrong, how to live a good life, what is just, what's unjust, and that they're not dependent on my feelings and my emotions and my opinions. They're just true, right? Based on reason, based on what's correct, not based on any of these other reasons, right? And so again, they see themselves as the rivals of the Sophists, here to save the day, right? The philosophers. Okay. So keep that in mind when we look at this reading here. I'm finally going to get to the reading, and we look at these opening lines of the Apology, and we hear what Socrates has to say. The first thing he talks about, the very opening, is how his speech, the way he talks, is different from those that are accusing him, right? So this should remind you of what I just said of the Sophists. Even though he doesn't mention them, this should sort of get you thinking like that. So let's read the opening lines here, and then we'll pause a minute. But for those of you who have the handout, hopefully you should have this printed out or at least open up on a, I don't know, separate window or something. I'm starting right at the top, so page 20, first page of the PDF. And so again, this is Socrates on trial. He's just heard all the accusers, and here's how he begins. I do not know, men of Athens, how my accusers affected you. As for me, I was almost carried away in spite of myself. So persuasively did they speak. And yet, hardly anything of what they said is true. Of the many lies they told, one in particular surprised me. Namely, that you should be careful not to be deceived by an accomplished speaker like me. That they were not ashamed to be immediately proved wrong by the facts, when I show myself not to be an accomplished speaker at all. That, I thought, was most shameless on their part. Unless, indeed, they call an accomplished speaker the man who speaks the truth. So what is he saying about himself? How is he different from the accusers? Again, it's the way they speak. But what words does he use to characterize their speech versus his?
I think he used the word truths, claiming that they speak lies and his is the truth.
Right. So he's speaking truthfully, they're speaking lies. Okay, that's one probably major point. But what else? He says even though they're speaking lies, he was carried away in spite of himself. Why? Because they were also speaking not just falsely, but what other way? Even though they were speaking falsely, they were still what? What's the word I'm looking for? What's
They
the
were not
word he
ashamed.
uses? What's that?
They were not ashamed.
Well, he said they should be ashamed, right? That they should be ashamed to say that he was a good speaker. But
What page y'all on again? I had lost track.
it's the very first page of the handout. So if you have the
Oh, okay. Cause I was looking and my thing closed. So, all right, I got it.
I'll read it again. He says that I was carried away in spite of myself, so persuasively did they speak, and yet hardly of anything what they said is true. So what? What's the word? How do they speak? Falsely, and then what?
Like
Persuasively.
false.
Persuasively. Thank you. Persuasively. Right. So even though they're lying, according to Socrates, right? Even though they're not speaking the truth, what they're saying is pretty persuasive. And it appears to be true, but it is false, right? It even got Socrates, even he was like listening to them apparently, and he was getting convinced, even though he knew they were wrong. They were using rhetoric, maybe, like the Sophists, right? They were using some, the Sophists often were known for, part of rhetoric to them was learning how to argue for both sides of an argument. It doesn't matter what's right, because you got to know both sides. You might want one side to be right if it's to your advantage, or another side. So they would learn how to speak persuasively. But what Socrates is saying here is that it just appears to be true, but it isn't. Now, this distinction between appearance and reality, it runs all throughout Plato. Even in the Allegory of the Cave, you can see it, right? That those shadows appear to be real to the people that are prisoners. They don't know anything else. So for them, it's very convincing. What else can there be? Just these shadows. You don't believe in the shadows? That's just appearance. If they were free and they could turn around and see everything, they would know that that's not real. That's just shadows, right? So the idea here is that, there's some way that falsity or deception can be convincing, actually. But if you look at it deeper and examine it, the truth comes out that it's not there, right? So again, I want you to keep that in mind. Like when we're doing this whole reading, that dichotomy is there. That's where the appearance, appearing, being persuasive, looking true, but not really being true. So let's pause here. I'm going to jump into his defense, right? But first, let me ask, just to sort of test you guys, see who's doing the reading and who isn't. Why is he on trial? What's he being accused of here? There's a lot of things, but yeah.
It's like I said previously, one of the parts he is being accused was corrupting the corrupting youth.
Yes.
And then the other was crap.
So you got the first one.
He's just on trial for 3 different things. I took notes over it. 1 second.
I didn't quite hear you. I'm really just looking for 2 things. I mean, there's a whole list of things you could go over, but I think they all kind of boil down to 2 main charges. And the first one is the corruption of the youth. Someone said teaching people. Kind of, you're close. You're like halfway there. What was he teaching people? What was he talking about?
Facts, like he was teaching like real facts and like history.
Well, that's his side of the story, and maybe that's true. But what are the accusers saying? They're not saying he's teaching facts. They're not saying he's teaching truth. What do they say he's teaching?
He's teaching them different deities, different gods, or
right,
or
good.
Falsifying the gods they already believe.
Right. So he's corrupting the youth, and he's going around teaching them about other gods or different gods, or things about the gods that are not true, or so there's all these different ways they phrase it, but there's really one word. I'll type it here in the chat box. Usually people will just say he was charged with impiety, right? So the word impiety, not to be pious. You're not being pious. Impiety. To be pious means that you're very respectful and observant of your religion, right? If you're a pious Christian, you go to church every Sunday and you pray and all that. If you're a pious Muslim, you pray to Mecca 5 times a day, and you do the 5 pillars and all that. So they're saying you're not doing that. In fact, you're doing the opposite. You're disrespecting the gods. You're not recognizing the gods of the city, and you're teaching about false ones, right? And so that's sort of it. So that kind of sums up the gist of the accusations. Now, why do they call this? Why is the title of this reading the Apology? Why does he title it? Is Socrates apologetic? Does he sound apologetic in the first thing I read?
It's more like a defense.
He don't sound apologetic at all. It's like he's standing up for what he feels is right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's he's standing up. But why do they call it the Apology though? Why that title?
Because it was supposed to be an apology towards the people who were falsely accusing him, and towards and basically saying like, hey, forgive me, I was wrong. Like being like it was supposed to be like, forgive me, I was wrong type of deal.
Good guess, but no. It's actually, there's no way you would know the answer unless you read the footnote here.
Like it's the word apology. It's like there's a apologia or something.
Yeah,
Like the word.
I think it's actually pronounced.
Yeah.
It's pronounced apologia. I think is how you're supposed.
Apologia. Yeah. It's basically its English word is apology, but it really means defense in Latin or whatever what language I was. Or
Right.
Greek. I mean Greek.
In Greek, yeah. In ancient Greek, the word apologia means defense. You're defending yourself, right? It actually is only used in a legal context. So it literally means legal defense. But so when you see the title, it's basically what you call it's called a transliteration. It's not a translation, it's a transliteration. So it sounds like the original word, apologia, but it doesn't mean the same thing. I guess like the people that were first translating this to English just thought it sounded cooler. Plato's apology instead of Plato's legal defense. Right. I have seen some versions, not very often, but I have seen some versions that don't translate it as the apology. It'll be the defense of Socrates, or the trial of Socrates. But yeah, he's definitely not apologetic at all. But how does he? Let's get back to the charges, right? How does
He's
he?
like a big cocky, if you ask me.
What's that?
He's like a big cocky, if you ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We'll talk about like how to interpret this in once we get to the end, I guess. Like what exactly is Socrates trying to teach us here, if anything, right? Is he just taking a stand, whatever, right? But let's look at this. Let's look at his defense, because I don't think it's a real obvious defense. He starts off by kind of mentioning the charges. Here's what they're saying, right? I'm corrupting the youth. I'm not respecting the gods. That's all false, right? I'll grant you that they were persuasive. I'll grant you that they sounded convincing. So let me explain why I have this reputation, right? So he sort of starts with that sort of framing, right? I think I know why I have this reputation. And what does he say? Like, why does he have this reputation? He says, it all started when I found out something about myself, right? So he heard something about himself, and it made him start questioning himself. And it made him start questioning other people. And he thinks that's really when the trouble began. And that's when this reputation began. So what am I talking about here? What did, let's test and see who else did the reading. What did he hear about himself that made him start questioning himself and questioning others? You can type it in, or you can just open your mic.
Was it when apparently he was like it was like Zeus I don't know, I forgot what god, but like says like he was the wisest of all men.
Right, it wasn't Zeus, it was actually Apollo, but no big deal. You got the main point. The main gist of it is that he heard not from a god, but from the oracle, who is supposed to speak. The god speaks through the oracle, right? And the oracle said, there are none wiser than Socrates, right? And this is not just any oracle, right? This is the oracle at Delphi, right? In fact, I think I have, let me see here. I've got a slide. I'm not going to type it out. Let me share my screen and get back to my slideshow here. Yeah, the oracle at Delphi was kind of like the creme de la creme of oracles, right? First off, just to repeat myself a little bit, an oracle, again, it was a sort of a prophet, right? Usually a priestess. And the Greeks believed that this priestess, this oracle, would go into a trance or whatever. And when they were in a trance, they would be possessed by the god or the goddess or whoever, right? Now, this particular oracle, the oracle at Delphi, this is the one that says that there are none wiser than Socrates. This is like the most important one, right? It's like, it's supposed to be this, they thought it was the center of the universe. There's this Omphalos stone that is like located there. It's an actual historic place, right? The ruins, you can visit them today. Well, maybe not today because of COVID, but you know what I mean. But that rock that's there, they think was actually the rock that Zeus used to kill his father Kronos, right? At the beginning of the Olympian time or whatever. So it's a pretty important place. And, as was said earlier, the god Apollo is the god who is supposed to be speaking at Delphi, right? So if you go visit Delphi, you're getting wise counsel directly from the god Apollo. Now, why is that significant? Well, Apollo is associated with the sun, with light, with truth. He apparently hates lies. He hates dishonesty. Unlike some other gods, right? Even though Zeus was considered a more important or a more powerful god, Zeus was often a liar, right? He's known to visit people in dreams and give them prophecies that were false in order to deceive them, to get his way, right? But Apollo is sort of known never to do that. So when Socrates' buddy, or his friend Chaerephon's brother, goes to visit this oracle, and he asks the oracle, hey, are there any wiser than Socrates? And the oracle says, no, there are none wiser than Socrates. That's like pretty serious. They're like, whoa, you can like take that to the bank, right? If you're a Greek, a believing Greek, that they took it pretty serious. And Socrates kind of does too, but how exactly does he react, according to his story, when he finds this out? When he's told that there are none wiser than him, what does he say? Is he like, yeah, I'm pretty smart, pat myself on the back, is that his reaction or no? Who did the reading?
He didn't believe it, and so he went out to search someone who was wiser than him.
Good. So he doubts it. He's like, really? He realizes that the oracle often speaks in riddles, right? There's a famous story about how this king once asked the oracle if he should invade the Persian Empire, right? And the oracle said, if you invade Persia, a great empire will fall. So he invaded, and his empire fell, right? So Socrates is not some idiot. He knows these stories. So he's like, this must be a riddle. And like you said, he goes and investigates. He says, well, I'm going to find out what this means. I'm going to go seeking wisdom. I'm going to go talking to people who have this reputation for wisdom. Why does he doubt himself, though? Why does he think that can't be the meaning, that he can't be the wisest? Why this initial reaction, you think? What makes him be this way? How would you react if someone told you, what if God talked, God came down and talked to you one day, hello, I am God, and I'm here to tell you that you are the wisest person in the universe. What would you think? Would you have a
I would be shocked and wouldn't think I'm dreaming.
But why? Why though? That's the question. I would be too. I'd be like, really? But why would you be shocked?
Because in my religion, Jesus is the one who helped with all, and he pretty much delivered the word for God. So I'm like,
let's say, okay, if you're Christian, don't you believe Jesus is God? I said you're the smartest person in the universe, right? So let's try to keep it non-denominational, whether or not you're a believer or not. I'm just saying, you get it from some authority that you take as undeniable, right? Let's just say that, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or whatever, you get this from authority that you can't doubt, that you're the smartest. Like, I think you're right, Danielle. Like, you'd be like, what? That's a shock. I'm shocked. But why? Why? Guys, come on. Stop. I see you guys proselytizing in the comments. That's, I mean,
It'd be disappointing.
This is a philosophy class. It's not a class in religion. Somebody needs to mute their mic. I can't hear myself. Guys, Danielle, I'm sorry, Danielle, but wherever you're at is very, very loud. And whenever you turn your microphone on, I can't hear myself. I can't hear other students. So either get to somewhere that's not really loud or just type your comments in the chat box. But look, whether or not Jesus or God is the Alpha or the Omega, how do you know that?
I mean, you don't. You don't know that.
How do you know that? So stop saying it in the comments unless you're going to give me proof. Like, I'm trying to make a point here, so please stop bringing in all this stuff. It's just going to make things more and more complicated. You know, I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just like, guys, like, come on. I get it. You're Christian. You have faith. Whatever. That's great. Wonderful for you. I love your belief. That's wonderful. I'm not trying to get you to doubt it. I'm just trying to get you to think critically here. If you were told by God, or if you were told by, like, if you're Socrates and you're told by what you thought was Apollo that you're the smartest, what would you react? You'd be like, I don't believe, that's crazy. Like, like Socrates, he respects Apollo, so he believes it. He's like, it must be true, but it must have a deeper meaning. Like, maybe even if you're a Christian and you believe in God and like you believe God talked to you, you might say, well, God sometimes he'll say things, but it has a deeper meaning, right? And so, like, but why would you react that way? Why wouldn't you just take it on face value? Like, why would you?
Because it's not normal. It's not like part of society is normal to just receive a message like that. Yes, I may believe in God, but like for you to just come and be like, for God to just come out of nowhere and just say, oh, you're the smartest.
Right.
I mean, I'll be like, huh? Like, it's not normal. It's not something I'm used to. It's never happened. It's the first time. And it's just like, right. I need a moment. Like, you'll go through different stages. Like,
yeah, I guess my
disappointing too, because like what kind of person or like what do you do for a living? Like if you've just been like, let's say you've been working at retail your whole life, and then suddenly God comes and says you know everything.
Yeah,
it's like, well, what have I been like? What have I been doing?
Right,
I've been searching and researching all this other.
Right. It would be surprising.
Like
right?
Like if. Because I feel like what Apollo, what's his name? Socrates was trying to say was like, why am I the wisest person in the world when I still have questions? Why am I still asking these things? Good. Like, why am I still doubting myself? If I was the wisest person, I would have known everything. I wouldn't have to ask people. I wouldn't feel because the thing is he feels like inferior people are more on the people who ask things, so he feels like he's inferior. He's not a perfect person who's the wisest, who knows everything. So he's questioning what the oracle said because of that.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good summary of basically his reaction. That's why he reacts that way. He's like, there's so much I lack, right? Like, I can't be the wisest because there's so much that that I don't know, that I want to know, right? I'm surprised no one has said this, but I would react like it seems like I've met so many other people that seem smarter than me, right? Like, there's no way I'm the smartest, right? Somebody else.
Wait, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe being wise means that is his way of thinking, the way he views the world in terms of always questioning and not really being certain. It's like maybe him being the wisest is a sense of is a kind of way of saying you're not arrogant enough to believe that you're the wisest.
Right. No, I think you kind of like spoiled it, maybe not completely, but that's that's pretty much. I think you've summed it up. I think that's what in the end. I don't want to get super that far today. We'll come back to your point and expand on it. But I do think you kind of are on the right track. That I think that's sort of the lesson he learns, is that it's basically his, I forgot the word that you used, but he has like a sort of like a humility, or he's aware that he's wisest because he recognizes he's not wise. as paradoxical as that sounds, whereas other people have this presumption that he doesn't have. So I think you're right. And somebody, I think it was you, the last one talking, you also mentioned earlier that what he does after this is he goes and investigates, right? He goes and talks to other people who are wise to try to figure out, like, what the oracle meant, right? So I guess he's like, I respect the oracle. I respect Apollo, right? I'm a man of faith, according to he says. So, but I know the oracle, something that the God speaks in riddles. So let me figure this out. Let me find the deeper meaning, right? So let me read. There's a passage. I think this is like, if you have the PDF, it's on page 3 of the PDF file, and it's page 24 up here in the corner. If you've got a different version too, there's always these numbers in the margin, right? There's like numbers and letters. And so this is line number, I think, 21B. It's the paragraph starts, consider that I tell you this. So Socrates says, consider that I tell you this, because I would inform you about the origin of the slander. So like, where is this slander coming from? Why does he have a bad reputation? Why are people saying he's corrupting the youth and not respecting the gods, right? So where's this coming from? He says, when I heard this reply, like when I heard that the oracle said that there are none wiser than me, I asked myself, whatever does the god mean? What is his riddle? I'm very conscious that I'm not wise at all. What then does he mean by saying that I'm the wisest? For surely he does not lie. It's not legitimate for him to do so. So for a long time, I was at a loss as to his meaning, and then I very reluctantly turned to some such investigation as this. I went to one of those reputed wise, thinking that there, if anywhere, I could refute the oracle and say to it, this man is wiser than I. You said that I was the wisest. But then when I went to examine this man, there's no need for me to tell you his name. He was one of our public men. My experience was something like this. I thought that he appeared wise to many people, and especially to himself, but he was not. I then tried to show him that he thought himself wise, but he was not, and as a result, he came to dislike me. And so did many of the bystanders. And so I withdrew, and I thought to myself, I am wiser than this man. It's likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile, but he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I'm likely to be wiser than he is to this small extent, that I do not think that I know what I do not know. So after that, I approached another man, and he had the same experience, right? So what is he doing? He's going to these people who have a reputation for wisdom, and there it is again. The first group he goes to are the public men, whatever that means. We'll talk about that in a second. But he says that they appear wise to themselves and to the people standing around, but they're not, right? So there it is again, right? The appearance of wisdom, the appearance of truth, persuasive, sounds good. I want to believe it, but if you look at it, it's bullshit. It's not true, right? So again, like I said, this is the theme you're going to see throughout, not just this reading, but even the next one, I think, all of Plato, right? So, like I said, he starts with one particular group of people. He investigates the first group that has the reputation for wisdom, the public men, right? Who's he talking about? What does he mean by public men, do you think? What would we call that today?
Politicians.
Oh, just citizens, civil engineer.
I didn't quite catch you, Danielle, but I heard you, the first guy, politicians, and you're right. What did you say, Danielle? Did you say something else besides politicians?
Oh, I said citizens, just like normal people, I guess.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or
I mean,
workers.
it could be really, I think, anybody in power, I guess, like who has a public figure, I guess. A senator, a judge, something like that. What about the next group? So there's 3 groups who he seems to pick on who have a reputation for wisdom. So the first are the politicians. He didn't have much satisfaction with them. They thought they knew what they didn't know, whereas he was aware of his ignorance. But what about what other two groups does he chastise? Who got this far? Page 3. Come on, guys.
The craftsman.
Yeah, good. So that's really the last group he mentions are the craftsmen, the builders and carpenters and all that stuff. But who else? There's one other group we're missing. So we got the politicians, the craftsmen. Who else do you
Holy
think? You said the government? Well, that'd be the politicians.
No. I said those of faith, like holy men or like
Oh, holy men. You know, he doesn't mention them by name, but I guess you could technically throw them in the pile with the public men. I guess, you know, the people who are in charge of the temples and the priests, maybe he means them as well. It's not very clear. But nah, that's a good guess, but no. He picks on the politicians, the craftsmen, and think about it this way. Who do you think, besides those we've already mentioned, in today's society, who has a lot of influence on people's views and when they go looking for advice or like how to live their lives or like their style, how to dress? Where do a lot of people get their
Well, he was
The
talking about
media.
the very rich. Oh,
I'm sorry, what was
The
that last?
media.
You said media, yeah, sure, but who or what in the media? Like who in the media do people copy?
celebrities.
There you go, celebrities. Or somebody said trendsetters. I guess what's that word? Influencers, like social
Yeah,
media.
influencers.
But yeah, I think celebrity's a better word because it kind of catches all that, you know. So he doesn't say celebrities. He talks about poets, right? He says the poets. Somebody said rappers, pop stars. That I think is the modern day analog to the people he's going to. He goes to what he calls them the poets, but that word is kind of misleading because the Greek word poetry is poesis. It means to create, to bring forth, to bring something forth. And so it really can mean a lot of other things besides just writing a poem, right?
So you could just say entertainers then, like
Entertainment, creators, creative types, artists, you know. So he does mean poets. He means like Homer and all those guys. But he also means playwrights, people who wrote tragedies, they wrote comedies, musicians and things like that. They were very well written. Maybe not musicians so much, but people that wrote plays. The theater was a big part of Greek culture. And if you wrote plays, you were like pretty high up in society. You were pretty wealthy. And well, you know, if you were a successful playwright, you were not called a playwright. That's a new modern term, you know, European, you know, 19th century term. But back then you were just a poet. Right? You created stuff, you made stuff up, right? So we're getting pretty close to the end of class. So I don't want to get through all of these. What we're going to do at the beginning next time, we're going to start by looking at, you know, how Socrates reacts or interacts with these three groups. And it seems like there's a recurring theme, you know, even though I would say each of the interactions is a little different. You know, there's unique problems with the politicians. There's unique problems with the poets. You know, they've got their own idiosyncrasies, but there's an overarching theme. I think they all seem to have this sort of arrogance that they think they know what they don't know, right? But again, we'll expand on that more. I think this is a really good place to stop, and we're getting pretty close to the end of class. So I'll go ahead and pause it here. I'm going to stick around for another few minutes in case anybody has any questions. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording though, so that'll stop. But so that'll be the end of the lecture.